I'm very happy to have here David Cohen, Tanugi, to talk with us about innovation in wearable devices and his company, Embr Labs. David is the co-founder of Embr Labs, an MIT startup reinventing how we relate to temperature by developing technologies that improve our thermal comfort. Their flagship product, Embr Wave, is a wearable device focused on providing instant thermal relief anytime, anywhere by cooling or warming people instead of a whole room. We'll see some of that. David obtained his Ph.D. in material science and engineering, where he would develop some efficient membranes for water desalination. And his work has been ranked by Smithsonian magazine among the most surprising scientific milestones of 2012. And he was also listed on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2014 and on Technology Review's French Innovators Under 35 list in 2015. David is also an avid student of Mandarin, I didn't know that, rock climbing and mindfulness meditation. And we've been friends for quite some time, so I'm really happy to have you here tonight. Please join me in welcoming David. So it's very traditional to start talking a little bit about our speaker's background. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what your first years, and how you got involved in entrepreneurship.
Sure. Yeah, I guess this microphone is working. How's everybody doing? So thank you so much for hosting us here tonight, Carlos, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's a huge honor, especially on your last Startup Grand Night. So to answer your question about my story and my background, just a little bit about myself. I'm from Paris, France, and I've been here in the US since university. I'm kind of more of a technical person by background. I studied physics as an undergrad and had a really strong interest, in addition to kind of just pure science, in China and Chinese for some reason. That's why Mandarin was on my list. And when I was in college, I spent a summer in the Chinese countryside, and I had spent a few weeks in Beijing before that, and so in Beijing everybody knows about the pollution, and I had this thing where at first I was like, oh yeah, pollution, it's not very convenient, and I started getting weirded out after a couple weeks, noticing that you never saw the sun, because there's always smog, and therefore you see kind of like a halo in the sky, but you never actually see the sun. And I was really looking forward to being in the countryside for this volunteer project where at least I would have some blue sky and stuff. And we go on this train ride, which is 7 hours, and then we have another hour in the car, and I arrive in this village, and it's the exact same smog as in the city, because believe it or not, the smog just extends over most of northeast China, and being in the countryside or being in the city doesn't make a difference. So for another few weeks, I still didn't see the sun. And at the end of that, I kind of had this very strong sense that it would be really, really depressing if the entire world were like that. And I wanted to try and dedicate as much of my life as I could to making sure that it got better in China and it never got that bad where I live. And so I went back to college, dedicated to try to use my physics major towards environment and clean energy applications. Finished studying physics, went to work for an environmental nonprofit called the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, in Washington. And there I wasn't really doing science per se, and certainly not entrepreneurship, but I was basically doing energy policy analysis and trying to get the US and China to work together more constructively on climate change. So that was after college. And throughout that process, I realized there was something a little bit frustrating about policy. Sometimes it goes the way you want, sometimes it doesn't go the way you want, sometimes it really doesn't go the way you want. And I felt like doing, inventive technology, science stuff might be a more constructive way to help the environment than relying only on policy. So I applied to MIT to get a Ph.D. in material science and focused my Ph.D. on trying to make a more efficient membrane for water desalination. And there I had this very strong kind of satisfaction of doing both what I thought was really interesting new science, and also had the potential to make more clean water for the world, less energy consumption to make that clean water for the world. And that project is still going on. It's going strong in my research group. It's turned into a startup actually now called VS Operations. They're doing really well also, so a lot of satisfaction there. But one thing that I was feeling a little bit frustrated by is that I had no idea how my inventions in the lab and on the computer were actually going to turn into a real thing that was going to actually impact the world at scale. And I recognized that inventing something was only the beginning. And so I really wanted to try to learn about what the process is of taking something that's really starting in the lab and gets all the way to a thing that people are using or that is actually impacting the world in a positive way. And that's kind of what, by the end of my PhD, had really gotten me very interested in entrepreneurship as a way to make an impact, not just scientifically, but as much as possible at scale, I guess.
So was it at MIT where you started? Did you get involved in some entrepreneurship community there, or how did it all turn into EmbrLabs?
This is such a stereotype at this point that I hesitate to say it, but there's something about the Cambridge area and the MIT ecosystem that really makes people interested in entrepreneurship, and people just catch the bug of entrepreneurship. And as much as it's a total cliche, it's kind of true in my case. I hadn't really thought about startups until coming to MIT. I thought of startups primarily as something that people with like a very big ego and a strong sense of insecurity who really had something to prove were doing. And that was not really me. But kind of through MIT, I realized like there's something very worthwhile about trying to take what you've developed and try to push it further down to the finish line. And so there's something about all the classes and the workshops and the talks and the events and the summer programs at MIT that kind of got me really interested in trying to go from science to the startup world. And that's kind of how my current startup project, Embr Labs, got started.
So tell us a little bit more about that story. How do you start with that topic? Why heat? Why in the body? How do you meet your co-founders? Tell us a little bit about the origins of Embr Labs.
Sure. Maybe I'll start by giving just a 1-minute description of what we actually do at Embr Labs, and then I'll tell you guys about where it came from. So our company is called Embr Labs. It's spelled EMBR Labs, and Embr stands for Environment, Mind, Body, Resonance. And it's this idea that like if you want to feel good in your life and you want to be in tune and be a constructive, happy, productive individual, you need your mind, your environment around you, and your body to all be working pretty well, and working pretty well together too. And in that context, we realized that one of the things that really affects all of our well-being is actually temperature comfort. You guys probably know this, but in any given space, there's at least 20%, more like 30, 40% of people who are uncomfortably hot or cold, and only some fraction of people who are comfortable. And that's assuming that a smart person is actually controlling the thermostat. Most of the time, we're all kind of uncomfortable, and everybody knows how that actually can make you, at best, it just makes you kind of distracted and in a bad mood. At worst, it can make you feel really, frustrated or self-conscious or drowsy and things like that. And in addition to that, in the context of the environment and the context of what I described about China earlier, when I was at MIT, I was very frustrated by the fact that there's just a lot of air conditioning and heating use in spaces that are not very well occupied. So we would be, during my PhD, I would be in a space that was like this big, and there would be all these vents that are cooling the air in the summer, and it's like super cold, like colder than I would like, and I'm the only person there. And it felt like a waste of energy to cool it in the first place, and also I'm freezing at the same time, so there's something about that combination that's not working well. And so about halfway through my PhD, I started this project that now has turned into Embr Labs that's really dedicated to trying to improve the lives of people who are perpetually bothered by the temperature. And what we do right now is we've developed a wristband called Embr Wave. I'm wearing an engineering sample of Embr Wave right now that changes temperature on your wrist so that whenever you're too hot or too cold, you can dial in warmth, or you can dial in cool, and it's going to feel really nice and refreshing or really nice and toasty, and it's going to help your body feel less bothered by the temperature without having to change your core temperature. And how it got started, actually, Carlos, you probably know this story, was I was halfway through my PhD, and there's this competition in the materials science department every year called MadMech. And MadMech is basically like a long, glorified hackathon, if you will. Instead of lasting 24 hours or 48 hours, it lasts like 4 months or something like that. And so it's like a part-time thing. But the idea is you encourage people to come together in teams and to like brainstorm around a topic. In this case, the topic was sustainability, so it was great for me. And form a team, build some stuff, and then iterate on the prototyping, learn about making things and doing market research along the way. And at the end, there's a big, competition where you kind of like present your idea and your prototype and stuff. And so we started with this super simple idea of, okay, we know that we waste lots of energy in buildings. We know that most people are uncomfortable because we are. We know that a lot of people put cold stuff like an ice cube or a can of soda on their wrist when they're uncomfortable, so that must be an interesting, we could probably build a wristband like that. And we know a class of advanced materials called thermoelectric Peltier materials that when electricity goes through them, they change temperature. So digitally, if you control how much power is going through, you can actually make them get very warm, very cold, a little bit warm, a little bit cold, whatever you want. And so that seems like the obvious thing that you would use to try to give somebody that type of temperature relief. So we built a super simple prototype during this competition. It had basically one of these tiles that we'd bought on Amazon. It had a big computer heatsink, and it got basically this kind of like fake Rolex band and a bunch of wires going to like a power supply. And we won the competition. I guess people liked the idea. It was weird. It was new. It was like promising in the long run if it worked. People felt the demo actually felt really good, which it did. There's something about warmth when you're cold or cold when you're too warm that just feels amazing. And that gave us a little bit of money to kind of keep playing with prototypes while we were still students. And it also, more importantly, gave us a lot of press coverage. MIT News wrote about us, and then Wired Magazine wrote about us, and then the Weather Channel wrote about us, and then CBS did a piece about us. And then it kind of went into this nice snowball of people writing about other people's articles. And along the way, people would hear about this project, and they would join our newsletter. And after a few months, we had like a few thousand people on our newsletter. Now it's like 20,000. And so these are people that we didn't pay to acquire. We didn't have to pay a PR firm or anything. They just thought the idea had promise, and they really wanted this thing if it ever became available. And so receiving all this inbound interest got us very interested in like, okay, well, we built this thing. We think it's cool. Does anybody want it? Should we actually try to make it into a real product? And at that stage, we still thought that the main value was going to be about saving energy in buildings. But all the emails we were receiving were actually not at all about that. They were all about, I'm freezing in my office, or I'm always sweating in front of everybody and it's super embarrassing, or it's I get back from the gym at work and I really hate having like sweat stains under my dress shirt, can you help me? That kind of thing. And we realized people were suffering for different reasons than what we thought. And I think we had the good sense, and when I say we, by the way, I mean myself and my 3 co-founders from the materials department, Mike, Sam, and Matt. Yeah, Mike, Sam, and Matt. So that was we, 4-person co-founding team. We realized, okay, there is a problem. It's not quite what we thought, but our technology we don't know whether it helps these people's problem, but they think it helps them at least. And we spent basically 2014 trying to do a bunch of accelerators at MIT and trying to go through a bunch of competitions to give us enough money to prove that there was something interesting there. And then spent the following year essentially building prototypes that were robust enough that we could lend them to people. Because until then, nobody really believed, apart from the people who were emailing us, nobody believed that a bracelet that can cool or warm and make you feel more comfortable would be actually useful or effective. And so investors, we talked to like hundreds of investors and did all these pitches, and nobody cared about what we were doing. It didn't think it made sense. And same with everybody else. And so when we finally got enough, traction to build prototypes that you could lend to people, found 200 people that we could lend them to, and won a competition that would pay to make 50 prototypes, then we basically did all that, had 50 prototypes, spent about 3 months lending them to people to learn who likes it, who doesn't like it. We don't know. And found out that if you've got multiple sclerosis, we can't help you. If you're really freezing in an office, we can help you. If you want to use this for running and have better performance when you're jogging, we cannot help you. We kind of like figured out just by lending stuff to people what a cooling or warming bracelet could do and could not do, because we didn't know. And we kind of had that data that we were able to then show to potential investors and to potential partners and everybody, and also to convince ourselves that there was something here. And what we found is that there were quite a number of use cases where actually having a small amount of cooling or warming that you can control really helped you, especially when it was a very frustrating thing. So it's not just I'm uncomfortable, it's I'm uncomfortable and really worked up about it. In 2015, we used all this beta testing data to raise some money from angel investors. We'll probably talk about fundraising a little bit later, so I won't talk too much about that. And basically, once we had this money, we spent 1 year designing the product. That was 2016. About a year getting manufacturing ramped up. This year, 2017, and doing a big Kickstarter pre-order campaign that we finished in October. And we can also talk about if you want. And so to summarize this long story, we're just at the beginning, but we're at the stage where we have a product. We've started shipping it to people who pre-ordered it, so they're receiving it in the mail now. And now we're getting ready. We've gotten part of the way. We invented a thing and we built it and we shipped it to people. But of course now there's, broad impact beyond the first thousands of people, I guess.
That's very interesting. So tell us a little bit about, you just mentioned how important it was to get the product in the hands of people and how you learn from that. How has that shaped the way you develop the product, and do you have any plans to keeping that process going as you move forward?
Yeah, so in the world of startups and technology development and companies in general, I guess, people usually kind of simplify and say that there's companies and startup ideas that are technology push, where you have a cool, interesting technology, you're trying to figure out what to do with it and who wants it. And you've got market pull things, where you've identified a need and you don't necessarily have a good idea for how to solve it. I think we started very much as a technology push. We had a hypothesis for why it might be useful, but we didn't know that we could help with that particular thing, and we didn't know what else we could be helpful for. And because at our core we're a technology team, it's always been really important for us to have to lend stuff to people and get feedback constantly, because otherwise we could spend years developing something that we thought was cool that nobody actually wanted. And I think a lot of startups make that the mistake of not doing enough of that user testing and feedback generation. And I'm not saying that we're perfect at it, but we try to do as much as possible because it keeps us as grounded as possible and actually solving a need. What kind of my holy grail, and I hope we succeed, is in getting to a place of product market fit, where you've got a thing that other people can't make as well as you, and it solves the problem of people who don't have a solution as good as yours. And it really takes push and pull to get to that point, I guess.
So what are those use cases that you discovered that are the most significant ones? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that discovery. But
yeah, of course. So again, we actually described the way we did these beta tests in 2015, like a shotgun approach, where shotgun pellets just go in all directions. We had this list of things that we thought we might be helpful for, based on all the emails that people were sending us. And that list was very large, and we just tried to identify. We sent out an email to our newsletter, said, are you interested in beta testing? If so, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us about why you would be interested in beta testing. What's your problem that you hope this is going to solve, and stuff like that. And what we found is that the use cases which we are most helpful are ones that, I guess the technical way of describing them is that they involve some type of a stress cycle. They involve people with a thermostat that's just a little bit out of whack compared to everybody else, for physiological reasons or stress reasons, or because of what they're forced to wear at work or at home, or doesn't matter the reason. But in all cases, there's something about that discomfort that really annoys them or makes them feel self-conscious or frustrated or powerless or something emotional. And that emotional thing makes it worse. So if they're cold, they kind of tense up because they're frustrated. And what happens when you tense up, you get colder because you're not going for a walk or breathing well or stuff like that. And similarly, if you're sweating and you're stressed out at the same time, what do? You stress more. And so specific examples of things that where beta testers have really liked what we do involve people who just are, normal, healthy individuals, but just sweat more and run hotter than everybody else and find it highly embarrassing. People who are stuck in an office where they just are freezing all the time and are frustrated about it. People who suffer from hot flashes, which can be after cancer treatment, it could be from menopause, it could be from a bunch of different things, but either way, you're just uncontrollably starting to get really hot and sweat during the daytime or the night. And there, it's not that we make it completely go away, but we take the edge off, make people feel less bothered by what's going on. And those are really the things where at the end of the day, that's probably broader than like a really, really specific demographic, but if you give me 3 survey questions, I'll be able to tell you whether a person is going to benefit from what we're building or not going to benefit.
Let's talk a little bit about fundraising, how you manage over time to get money, convince investors, and also a little bit about the Kickstarter campaign that was pretty successful.
So when we started developing Embr Wave and we were still students, everybody told us, are you going to do a Kickstarter campaign? For those people who don't know, Kickstarter is a platform that lets people kind of propose a project and then gets funding from people who think the project should see the light of day. And then if the project does see the light of day and enough people raise money, then the people go and build the thing, and then they send one of the devices or the product or whatever to the backers as a reward. It's a very standard way in the hardware sector to try to get started and to get kickstarted, if that makes sense. We resisted the temptation of doing that very early on because we felt like, well, we felt a couple of things. One is we felt like it wasn't going to be enough money, that our impression was that it's going to be more expensive to actually bring a product to market than we could possibly raise on Kickstarter, and we were right, it turns out. And second of all, we felt like the people who were going to get Embr Wave on Kickstarter, if we started that, when it was still a super basic prototype with wires coming out, would be really, gadget savvy, kind of nerdy guys who don't necessarily have a temperature problem at all, but just think it's cool. And we didn't feel like that was going to help us very much towards our goal of answering this question of, have we made something that people really need, people who need it actually find helpful or not. So we didn't do Kickstarter until a few months ago, so 4 years into the project. And instead we kind of like sustained ourselves on like a little bit of competition money here and there for a few years, or maybe 1 year. And then actually one thing that we've done completely different from a lot of startups is we have not taken any venture capital money. So no VCs until today, no institutional VC money. And that was primarily driven by the fact that we felt like it was going to be a little while before we could really see what we wanted to do at scale. And VCs, based on the way they raise their money from their limited partners and their investment thesis, are usually looking for something that turns around in about 5 years. And if you're not going to turn around in 5 years, they're really going to pressure. They're either not going to be interested in you, which many VCs that we talked to were not interested in us, or they're really going to pressure you to like blow it up really big. It doesn't really matter whether you're building long-term value. I'm being a bit, I'm exaggerating here, but to some extent it's true. And then have some big exit, whether it's an IPO or an acquisition or something, just in time for them to kind of have that 5-year return. And it makes sense from their perspective, but it's if you can have the option of, keeping more of that control, everybody, including VCs, tell you you should try to avoid doing that. So we didn't take any money from VCs, and instead we went to a lot of wealthy individuals, what people call angel investors. And it's hard, and it took a while to find the right people, but eventually we found a gentleman who's part of a little collective of angel investors who got us started, led our seed round as part of his little angel investing collective. And then the following round, which was a Series A, was led by him. So it was cool that he kind of was in 2 rounds in a row, as well as the venture arm of Bose, the speaker and headphone company. And that's actually something that happened through Mass Challenge. So it was a really interesting kind of connection. They, Bose also came out of MIT. They're really interested in making people less bothered by the noisy environment around them, and so something that makes you less bothered by temperature around them, I think, was appealing to them, and they thought that we're doing something very unique, and so they, led our Series A, and they've continued to be a really cool strategic investor to date. And that's pretty much the story of our fundraising, apart from the Kickstarter campaign, which was also an infusion of cash a few months ago.
Great. So tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced in this process so far. I mean, you're just very early stage. You're starting to get the product out there. What have been some of the most interesting challenges you've been able to overcome that we can share with the audience today?
There's so many challenges. One of the challenges that my team has faced, and now the full-time founding team is myself, Matt, and Sam. The 4th guy, Mike, finished his Ph.D. later and went to do a different startup. So we're 3 founders. We're all material scientists. The company doesn't really need a material scientist, even one material scientist. There's not a lot of material science going on. And as a result, we have a highly technical team that's never done this before and that certainly doesn't have a lot of experience with business or strategy or negotiations or business development or marketing or B2C sales or anything like that. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we face is that we're very much reinventing the wheel, not for our technology, but in terms of the process of commercializing stuff. I often think of it a little bit like trying to cook in a kitchen for the very first time, and cooking an important meal at that, and having cookbooks at your disposal and and YouTube at your disposal, because we have lots of mentors and friends and advisors, and Carlos has been a great mentor of our team since a year and a half ago, for example. And so a lot of people can kind of tell you what they think you should do. And you can call your grandmother and you can ask her, hey, what am I supposed to do now? The thing looks like it's getting burnt or whatever. But the thing is, like, if you've never done it before, it's really hard to know when is the right time to do something and when to have the right judgment. And so often you end up burning stuff. And so I'm sure there's a lot of things that could have been done much more efficiently and much faster if we had done this before. The one thing I do tell myself is this is the way to learn, though. Like, we've learned a ton, and I could definitely make a better omelet next time than this time. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And then the second thing is there's always some balance between doing something that everybody else is doing, because of course it's a good idea, versus doing something kind of crazy, and at least you have no competitors, but but you don't know. Nobody else believes you that it's a good idea. And either way, you're going to face the challenge of it's hard to survive as a startup. And now, I look at a lot of the startups that were part of our cohort in the MIT Business School Accelerator 3 years ago now. I look at startups that we were friends with. A lot of them have gone out of business, and that's kind of, you keep working, you keep pushing this thing, and then sometimes it works out. A lot of the times it doesn't. And I think people just need to be aware of that. It's been definitely a struggle for us to keep going through. Multiple times we almost ran out of money, or actually ran out of money and just literally weren't paying ourselves for a month or something, and you have to be okay with it. And then even the ones that are still in business, my friends in other startups, a lot of them have actually had to change their focus. So especially the ones that had this kind of technology push, they thought they were going to like save the world with whatever they had invented, and now they're doing something for a use case and a type of customer that is really not exciting to them anymore. And they're doing it because it was pretty much the only way to stay in business and survive as a company. But they thought they were going to like do this really glorified stuff, and instead they're, working in, pick your not glamorous area, and that's what they're doing. And I feel more fortunate than that because, as much as our focus is now more on making people thermally comfortable and less on saving energy in buildings, although they kind of go together, at least I still feel good about both aspects, and I don't feel like I'm betraying my ideals in any way. But one thing I definitely encourage everybody to think about is if you want to go build a startup to, do renewable energy, and it turns out that you're getting pushed in the direction of oil and gas, say, or mining or whatever, do you want to do? Are you going to say yes, or are you going to say no? And deciding that ahead of time rather than being faced with a decision and not knowing what to do.
Let's talk about, you said a space with no competitor doing something crazy. Let's talk about wearables in general and why you landed up on the wrist, the most common space in wearables, and there's many other places in the body where you can control heat and temperature. Let's talk a little bit about that, and did you look at other wearable devices, and how do you learn from that?
So the wearable technology space has changed a lot since we started this project. So like you're saying, Carlos, this is our first product. Embr Wave is based on the wrist. And sure enough, there's lots of other stuff you could be wearing on your wrist, which makes it a very crowded space, both from a metaphorical perspective in terms of like things people can buy, and also from a physical perspective. People are not going to wear like 3 different things. And we totally recognize that. That does make it kind of tough from a competition perspective. There are 2 big reasons why we chose the wrist when we started this project. The first one is the wrist is actually a really good place to give people localized temperature. It's the reason why, whenever I talk about localized cooling, people will say, oh my gosh, like I'm always putting my wrist against the cold banister in the subway, or against a cold can of soda, or I put an ice cube here. And there's a reason for that. It's just because there's a lot of blood flow. It's a pulse point, and it's also an area that has a lot of temperature sensitivity. So the nervous system is like, very involved here. And so it was not a bad place to choose from a purely, physiological perspective. The other thing is, the Apple Watch didn't exist at the time. There was just Fitbit, and half of the Fitbits were the little things that like you clipped onto your bag, and the other half were starting to be the band ones. But the wrist was not really a crowded wearable space yet at that point, and so we kind of thought, oh, cool, like that's available. And that obviously has changed because now there's the Apple Watch, there's all these different kind of Fitbit and Jawbone and activity tracker things. There's other smartwatches. There's a whole universe of stuff that goes on people's wrists, and that, to some extent, is good because those are all things that we could integrate our technology into one day. So I get excited about that. But for this first product, it's true that it's a little bit tricky. Yeah, the wearable space has definitely changed. Another thing that I see about wearables is when we started this project, the main emphasis was on fitness tracking, and by fitness I just mean steps, really. So there were a few big companies that were in the wearable space. Jawbone, Fitbit, Misfit was another kind of close competitor, and what they did basically is they took a technology that was about 50 years old, namely a pedometer, just counts your steps, and they just made it connected to a really cool app that kind of extrapolated how many steps you took, and gamified it so that you were rewarded for exercising and all that kind of stuff. And what you find actually is 4 years later, those companies have all totally changed. Jawbone's out of business. Misfit's has been acquired by Fossil and is more in the fashion category now. Fitbit has pretty much stopped trying to sell direct to consumers because people know what walking 10,000 steps feels like now, and they don't necessarily want to pay for it anymore, much less wear something. And they've gone very much in the kind of B to B to C, business to business to consumer. Sell to an office, sell to an HR department, sell to an insurance company type of direction, and then have the insurance company or the office kind of give these guys for free to people. And that's because they were really having trouble finding, interest from individual customers for that particular, fitness tracking value proposition. And even something like the Apple Watch, which came out after we started this project, has very much shifted also away from the pure consumer, everybody's going to want to see their text messages on their wrist direction, and much more in the kind of B2B to C or fitness directions. So they've also kind of moved away from what was at first like, full consumer, everybody's going to want to wear this thing directions. And I think that kind of speaks to the fact that like people, you always have novel things are exciting, so everybody wants to wear a novel thing. But after a while, like the novelty fades, and then only the stuff that really has long-term value stays. I'm hoping that thermal comfort is one of them. And we've had lots of conversations about the Apple Watch, for example, but it's clear that a lot of the functionality that people thought was pretty cool at first, and after a while they realized that maybe it's not so useful. What I get really excited about when I think about the wearable space, in addition to obviously thermal comfort on demand, is things that are kind of less about sensing and more about actuating, I guess you could say, doing something specific and practical. And there are a number of wearables now that are much more interested in stress relief than they are in pushing you to do stuff. And so they're monitoring your breathing, or they're monitoring your heart rate, or they're monitoring your galvanic skin response, or they're trying at least. And they do that kind of in combination with an app, not to push you to do anything, but to remind you, hey, you're getting worked up right now. Or, hey, you didn't sleep very well last night, so you might want to take it easy. Or let's walk you through this meditation exercise. Or I'm going to vibrate, and the vibrations are going to like relax you, and that kind of stuff. And I think that we'll find out. Not everything's going to work, but kind of moving in the direction of trying not to give people just convenience or distraction, or pushing them to walk another 500 steps, but instead giving them something that feels tangibly valuable and useful. That's the direction that I think will probably end up being the best fit for wearables.
You mentioned a lot of the examples in wearables have a digital component to it. They either have an interface, or they have an app, they talk to the app, they collect data. Are there any plans for Embr Wave to do some of that? And what are your thoughts, besides the physical product and the thermal relief, to do something with the data, the fact that it's always on the wrist?
Thanks for bringing that up. That's a really interesting question. One of the biggest hardware accelerators and hardware investment firms in Boston is called Bolt. They run both an accelerator and also do investments. And we went to them very early on, and we kind of pitched our project to them. And they said, what? You don't have an app? You don't do data? Like, this is not a software as a service masquerading as hardware? We're not interested. We only do, hardware as a Trojan horse to really do software. They were very honest about it. And we said, yeah, that's not really what we do. There's good reason for why they have that investment thesis, actually. And that is, it's really hard to do hardware, one-time purchases of something and actually stay in business in the long run. Because the person buys the thing once, it took you a lot of money to build it, and it took you a lot of money to develop it in the first place and to keep paying your team to keep improving things. And people don't expect to pay for software upgrades or whatever. So you kind of have to keep spending money, but you only get paid once. And that's really hard. And that's why having some kind of recurring revenue that comes from data or analytics or app engagement or a subscription or things like that are really attractive to investors. And it makes sense. It definitely makes for a more lucrative company. Very early on, we kind of had this idea that it's almost philosophical in a sense, but we had this idea that Embr Wave is supposed to be the anti-that. It's supposed to be the thing that does only one thing and really well, so that you feel good, doesn't do any gimmicky stuff. It's not about, monetizing your data. It's just about making you feel more comfortable. And that's why the first version actually doesn't tell time. It doesn't show your text messages. It literally just does one thing, for better or worse. And that makes it harder from a business perspective, but at least it's kind of coherent with the image we're trying to convey. We did, however, put a Bluetooth chip into Embr Wave, primarily so that we could give people firmware updates whenever we improved something or whether we fixed a bug. And the way you do that is through a mobile app. And so little by little, we did find ourselves in a place where there's Bluetooth, there's a mobile app. If there's a mobile app, it might as well show you your usage so that you can learn something interesting from it. And so now we're at a kind of medium, kind of halfway stage where this is primarily not advertised as a connected data device. It's primarily a comfort device. But if you download the mobile app, you'll get to see how much cooling and warming you've been using. And if you've been doing something really different today and you hadn't noticed, the app's going to tell you so that you can think, oh, it's true, the season, the weather changed and I forgot to dress differently or something. And in that context, we're not planning on selling people's data, but we definitely want to learn a ton about who's using the device. When we make some small change to the way the warming happens or the way the cooling happens or the duration of it or whatever, does it result in more people using it or less people? We think we can kind of learn at scale. It's kind of like beta testing, but with tens of thousands of people. And the hope is that we can kind of complement the warming and cooling value proposition, the comfort value proposition, with more stuff through the app. And so where exactly that fits in, we don't really know. Because on the one hand, it's much less differentiated. There are a million apps out there and a million widgets with an app. But on the other hand, it's so much more, it's so much easier and quicker to develop app features and data aggregation and stuff like that than to do a manufacturing run. So for us, it'll be a balancing act, I guess.
Cool. So tell us where you are now. What's next for EmbrLabs after the Kickstarter campaign? What's happening right now, and what are the next steps for you as a business?
Yeah. So I'll backtrack a couple months. So 2016, spent a year designing a product. It takes a long time, it turns out. 2017, found a manufacturer based in the Shenzhen area in southern China. Spent a bunch of time trying to get it from we built it ourselves and it's designed in CAD and stuff like that, all the way to yes, we can make this on an assembly line. And towards June, July, we were okay, we know when this thing is gonna be ready to manufacture now. So let's try to get pre-orders so we know how many to make and so that we have the money to make them. So we hired a head of marketing. He had 2 months to basically get entirely prepared for this Kickstarter campaign. We had about 20,000 people on our mailing list who were really, had been following us for years and asking us, when's this product coming out? How do I get it? And all this kind of stuff. And we basically put together all these marketing materials, did our best to explain what this bracelet is and isn't. A lot of people thought that it was going to cool your blood, or you could throw away your coat and your air conditioner and you'd be fine. It's really more of a complementary thing, so there's a lot of education involved. And we launched this campaign at the end of September. We had this public goal to raise $100,000 during the 30 days of the campaign, and we raised that in about 2.5 hours, so the first morning. And that felt super nice. All these people from our mailing list had been waiting for 4 years, and as soon as the thing was available, they just went online and pre-ordered it. And by the end of the campaign, we'd raised 6.3 times more than we thought, so $629,000, which was really awesome. So 3,000 people from around the world basically pre-ordered Embr Wave and were super excited to get it. We used that money to do the first manufacturing run. We have about 600 units in our office and another 1,000 that are currently sitting with our manufacturer. And we just started shipping units to the first batches of people. So the first batch of 125 went out right before Thanksgiving. Another batch of 135 went out today in the mail. And these are like in our office. We're like literally in the evenings, like getting together, ordering pizza, and like putting stuff in boxes and printing shipping labels and everything. And what we're doing is we're doing that in very small steps and kind of like batches for now. And the reason for that is because we've done all these beta tests, but we still think we have a lot to learn from people. There's going to be feedback that, we're going to learn that we didn't explain something properly, or we're going to learn about a bug in the firmware that we didn't catch before, or we're going to learn that this and that use case is amazing and we didn't even know that those people liked us or didn't like us. And there will be lots of other things we'll learn, and we're intent on kind of doing stuff in small batches so that we can fix stuff and iterate very quickly. And the cool thing about Kickstarter is people expect very long delivery timelines. And so we told people we were going to ship in July. And now they're getting, the first people are getting their stuff in November, December. So it's going to be a happy surprise for the people who do, and not a surprise, and not a bad surprise for the people who get it in like March or April. So that's kind of in the very near term. It's like, basically, this thing has been floating in the air for a long time. It's going to land, and try to land in the softest, most successful way possible. And then there's kind of this really interesting question that we've been spending as a founding team hours and hours and hours brainstorming about and arguing about now. And that's kind of like, what's next? Like, we had this dream of like, I have this crazy idea of a product and I want to make it see the light of day. Well, guess what? Like, we made it see the light of day now. Now what do we do? It's not like we get a medal, and we certainly can't like walk away, because there's still, it's only the beginning. Only a few thousand people would receive it in the current setup. All these investors have given us their money, and we can't just say like, oh, we're closing down the company. We built, we achieved our dream. So this, in some sense, is really just the beginning, and there's a question both for investors and them getting a return, and also for like us making the vision about more than just 3,000 people and more about everybody else. That makes us ask this question of what do we do next. And in that context, the big thing that we're honestly most, I guess, conflicted about, and we don't have a good answer for this yet, is do we keep trying to do this like business to consumer thing where we just, this is product one, then we build product two, and it's going to be better than product one, and we sell it to individual customers on Amazon and our website and whatever else? Or do we decide that that's really going to be too long and too expensive, and we don't have the money to build a brand, and instead we're going to do, try to find a strategic partner, develop something with them, and try to integrate our technology into many other companies, kind of business to business style. And for a long time, we'd been saying the latter. We were saying that we were going to be the Gore-Tex of active heating and cooling. We've got the waterproof lining, and then other people will make and sell the jacket. And we would sell, in this case, we would sell the, the components, the software, the intellectual property that goes with our cooling and warming technology, because that's what we know how to do well. But that actually takes a long time. It takes a long time to find a partner or multiple partners. It takes a long time for them to develop a thing. They don't work on the same, development timelines as startups. And in some sense, you can't really do both either. You don't know which one's going to work, and you don't have the resources as a 9-person team with, only so many months of cash runway to just bet on both directions at the same time. And so that's something where it's part strategy and deliberation, and partially also just trying to read the tea leaves as well as possible. So customer feedback, interest from strategics, whatever it is that comes into you, I guess trying to read it to figure out what is going to be the best direction and what we should do very concretely. That's probably the biggest thing that is in the future for us. So hopefully 2018 for us is a year of more clarity on what we want to achieve. It's a year of lots of customers receiving their Embr Wave and really liking it. It's a year of us adapting quickly when there's stuff that they don't like. And it's a year of us kind of developing features either with a strategic partner or like ourselves for what's going to be, generation 2 of some sort.
Great. So on that note, I just want to open it up to the audience for some questions and get the conversation going. So Nicolas will go around with the mic.
Oh, cool. Just a quick question about the technology.
Yeah.
Do you have, you said you spent a lot of time doing beta testing and things like that. when you put this this volume of product out into the world, like, will you be able to get, what sorts of quantitative data will you get back from that process?
Do you mean for the purposes of us learning some stuff, or
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
purposes of
absolutely. Like,
proving things?
the perception of
learning.
people's, like, how do they perceive wearing this thing? Like, what are you actually getting out of doing it other than just making people feel good in a room? You know what I mean?
Yeah, great question. So there are many different levels to that. Qualitatively speaking, for us, it's going to be about the same metrics as everybody else. We'll just be doing a lot of it. We're really begging people to give us feedback. So we've got an email address that we really ask people to give us feedback to, and we have this big spreadsheet of everything people tell us, about the use cases, specific situations where Embr Wave was really helpful for them or not helpful, and things that they were confused about and whatnot. And ultimately, we'll also have customer reviews and those kinds of metrics as well. In addition to that, what we have, and which I get really excited about, is there's kind of an interesting feedback loop when it's a product that's not just sensing stuff, but actually actuating and doing things, where if it brings value to you, you use it because it brings value, because it feels good. And if it's not bringing value to you, you don't use it. And as a result, we can kind of use device usage of warming or of cooling as a proxy for what people are feeling and what's going on. And what we'll be doing is when people use the Embr Wave mobile app, it'll show them how much warming and how much cooling they've been using, and we'll also have access to that data on an aggregate level. So we'll be able to see what's going on, regionally, or by age group, or by level of warming, or level of cooling, or by season, or whatever, or when we make some change, what effect that has. And so at a high level, that'll kind of help us figure out whether people are using this more and more as they get, they figure out how to fit it into their lives, or they get, quote unquote, addicted to it almost, and they really prefer to have that in their lives, and develop more value over time, or whether it's what we hope it's not the case, and that this is like a novelty gadget, and that after a few months they realize they don't like it and they stop using it. And so a success story for us would be not just showing, look, people just keep using this over time, they use it a lot, they engage with it a lot, they use it more over time, but also that we start being able to learn from that data so that we know exactly what we would do to make the product better with the next firmware update based on people's usage.
So, kind of two parts to one question. What's the temperature differential of the perceived temperature? Because it's like sometimes we say, well, it's 12 degrees, but it feels like 10, right? and the reason I'm asking this is I happen to ski, but sometimes my feet are frozen, despite that I have a bunch of socks. Is that something that you looked at, how to look at some extreme use cases like this?
Cool. Well, I'll start by answering the second question. We have tested Embr Wave for skiing, and what people told us is they did not find it useful at all for going downhill because there's too much going on. They were focused on not dying, and they didn't feel any warming. But when they got back on the chairlifts, it was like, then you're not focused on dying, there's wind, you're not moving anymore, and then you start feeling cold, and having something that was nice and warm actually people really liked. However, in all of our marketing materials and everything, if you go on our website, we only talk about moderate environments. I don't remember whether we specify temperature range, but if we did, it would be your, like, I don't know, 65 to 75 or 80 degree range that we are interested in and talking about. And we talk about people who are bothered about temperature in normal environments where everybody else is not bothered. And the reason for that is kind of twofold. On the one hand, it's because, well, guess what? It's easier to make somebody feel warm in a moderate room than on a ski slope. So from a technical perspective, we're just better at doing that, to be honest. And the other thing is, like, it's kind of ends up being a different kind of person. The person who's always bothered, they have a bigger problem, and in the long run, we think that they're the people who are really going to use this day in and day out. Precisely because they're bothered in moderate environments. So we do get emails from time to time from people who work with the Army who are interested in, like, desert applications, or people who work on, like, Arctic oil rigs, and I'm sure there would be a lot of value there. But that's not what we're trying to do with the first product. And then to answer your question about the temperature range, basically we've designed Embr Wave so that what feels warm to you or what feels cold to you is actually super relative. it's not going to be very surprising, I guess, but you're in the shower, and one day you want to be at this level, and the other day you want to be at this other level. And if I touch a piece of metal and a piece of plastic, they're at the same temperature, but they feel different. So everything about how our body perceives temperature is quite different. And I jump in the swimming pool, and it's super cold at first, but then it doesn't feel cold anymore. So everything is very weird about how the body perceives temperature. And we've designed Embr Wave so that the hottest it'll get is right before your pain threshold. And that's kind of the same temperature as like a hot tub, more or less. If you went higher, some people would like it, but we would kind of get in this weird, legal territory. And it doesn't really need to get that cold in order to feel really soothing. And so what we do actually, and a big part of our technology that I didn't really talk about very much, is this is not just a thing that gets cold, it's a thing that changes temperature over time. Because everybody can make a thing that gets warm or cold. We didn't invent any of these components. What we figured out how to do is hack the nervous system's response to temperature to maximize how much it feels. And what we're doing constantly is changing temperature very fast, especially during cooling. And your body responds to those changes much more. So the device itself in like degrees Celsius is not that cold per se, but it feels pretty cold. And that's what enables us to have the device not consume too much battery power and last a decent amount of time on a battery charge, and also feel good even though it's just my wrist and not the rest of my body.
All right, just a funding question. When you come to an agreement with an angel investor, does that lock you into anything on exploring other types of funding? Are you basically committed to just that?
It really depends on what's in the contract. Typically, what's going to happen is an angel investor, if they're interested, they'll kind of propose to you a term sheet with a set of kind of like what they propose, what the terms of the proposed investment is, and then there's going to be a bunch of negotiation back and forth, and depending on how formal they are, they'll have like a document that they bring to you with lots of clauses, or you bring to them, or whatever it is. That stuff is not, there's no law that says what it has to be, and you could totally have an investor who has very specific opinions about stuff, and other investors won't. One thing that's pretty standard and that we did in our case was our angel investor who led our seed round, as part of the investment, required having a seat on the board of directors as a director. And that means that in addition to the founders, he also gets to vote. He doesn't have the majority because it's only 1 out of 4 directors, but he gets to bring stuff up. He does get to vote and potentially form coalitions or whatever he wants to do. And so from that perspective, he does have power if he has strong opinions. We're lucky to have an angel investor who's very supportive of our thought process and brings really good questions to us, so that sometimes there's stuff we hadn't thought about, but he's never said, I'm not letting you do this. And the way we've structured our agreement, he couldn't force us to do anything even if he wanted to. In general, and this is speaking from very limited experience, because I've only done this once, strategic partners, so large companies, are going to have many more conditions than an angel investor.
So I have a pretty quick question, and then a little bit of a longer one. Just briefly, like, what is the range of usage that you get out of the device on one charge? And then my second question would be, have you explored other articles of clothing that have more room for hardware? Obviously a shirt has more, or a jacket has more real estate than a wrist. So,
cool. To answer your question about battery life, it depends. It depends on how hard you drive the device and also on the environmental temperature that you're in. But basically, Embr Wave warms and cools in sessions of 3 to 5 minutes. And the reason for that is usually after 3 to 5 minutes, if the thing's been effective, you've stopped worrying about temperature. You just forget. Move on to whatever you were doing, reading your book, working on your paper or whatever, and then you forgot that you were cold or you forgot that you were warm, and then the thing kind of gradually fades into the background. We can do somewhere on the order of like 20 to 30 of those sessions on a battery charge. So that lasts me 2 to 3 days. Depends on your usage, but that's kind of about where we're at. And then other articles of clothing, we spend so many hours brainstorming new things that would be cool to do. It takes a lot of discipline to just focus on just making this one thing really good. So yeah, lots of ideas about clothing, lots of ideas about other accessories. It's all about places that people are willing to put technology, which is some places, but not all the parts of your body, and places where temperature feels really good. And you could kind of like draw that matrix up. I'm sure you could think of lots of cool places. If it can be done, we've probably thought about it, and now it's just a question of waiting until we actually have the resources before spreading our attention on too many things at once.
Awesome. Thank you.
David, I have two quick questions. First, do you have a plan how much revenue and net profit you want to make after 5 years, let's say? And second question, what's your long-term goal? You want to expand it as much as possible and keep working on it, or you want to establish good reputation and stable cash flow and sell it after five years or something like that?
Those are both very interesting and hard questions. Our goal, I think, is, I kind of mentioned, I alluded to this. Our goal is to kind of become this, Gore-Tex or Intel inside of active temperature, where we've developed this core technology that we can do better than anybody else, and we're kind of standard for any other company with a product that wants to have, thermal relief or active temperature as part of what they offer. And so in that context, how much revenue and how big our company is and stuff like that is going to depend on how many different areas we focus on at the same time. Are we doing, buildings and offices and health and wellness and sports and stuff like that, or do we just focus on one? To tell you the truth, I don't know what to imagine about the next 5 years exactly. I'm sure we have spreadsheets that would tell some kind of a story for investors, but it gets really foggy after a year. I don't really know what will happen, to be honest. Hopefully it'll be good. And then to answer your question about, my goal for the long term, I would like Embr Labs to become a long-term private company that exists for a very long time. I think of people who make Gore, WL Gore. I think of Bose as companies that never went public and never exited. They just became a really large privately owned company, and they have a lot of flexibility in what they do, and they're highly successful. So if we could do that, I would be super excited. I don't know that I would need to be there the entire time. Going back to my personal story, this was really about learning how to commercialize technology for me, and I've got this dream of continuing to do this. And so I'm sure there will come a point where the technology will have been developed, the technology will have been commercialized. It'll be much more about selling stuff and tweaking it for different applications, in which case I think I'll probably be more useful at that point as an advisor or a director than a full-time person. Whether that's in like 1 year or 5 years, I don't really know, but that'll be when it's the right time for me to kind of keep the company, let the company keep doing what it's doing and try to make the world a more comfortable place and try to find something else where I can also be involved in the commercialization.
So I have two questions for you. First being, do you have a patent on this thermal technology, or can this be easily replicated by some of your competitors? And secondly, I'm curious because I read a stat today that only 30% of consumers who buy some of these products like Fitbit and Apple Watch, etc., continue using the product after 6 months. So it seems like it's one of these, this industry or this space is one of those products where you kind of use it, it's fun, and then after a while you know what 10,000 steps feels like, so you stop using the product. Do you think that the thermal functionality is enough to capture consumers' interests for a long term?
So you asked about IP, and then you asked about kind of like long-term adoption. One of the really good things that we did really early on in this project, and if anybody's involved in like a hackathon or some exploratory workshop type of project, I encourage you guys to do this too. Right before the final presentation, this is when we were in 2013, we filed a provisional patent that we wrote ourselves and filed it to the US Patent Office that contained kind of the basics of what we were interested in doing and had done so far. And what that did is it enabled us to rightfully claim that we had developed this before a public disclosure, and that we had the rights to actually file a real patent around it, which we did within a year. And since then, we've filed another, I think, 3 patents. So 2 of them are just pending response, and 2 of them are published so far. And we're still waiting for the response on all of it. So yes, and we'll have more confirmation soon, hopefully, about the IP. But it's definitely a big part of what we're banking on. If everybody could do it, it would be harder for us to have a defensible position. And then to answer your question about long-term adoption, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's kind of part of what I was, alluding to earlier. Wearables are one of many categories of products that are, interesting at first but get old after a while, and that's great if you want to make a quick buck, but it doesn't really work in the long run. And what that actually tells us is, to answer your question directly, do we think that's going to happen for thermal comfort? I think it'll happen for some people, because the people for whom novelty was one of the primary motivators for purchasing, and it's going to not happen for the people who actually had a big problem. And we have this kind of super simple mental model in our heads where there's like the guys my age who are primarily buying for novelty, and there's like the people my mom's age who are buying it because, in spite of not really liking technology, because they really need it. And my bet, if I had to bet, is that right now we're going to be like 50-50 in terms of who's buying it, and that a year or 2 from now it'll be mostly my mom wearing it. So we try to really make a product that works for both of us in the meantime.
Yes, you'll discover how big the market is as you move forward.
Hi. Would you be able to give us a range of the price of the product, and can I order it?
Yeah, you can order it. You can get it online right now. It's going to retail. Embr Wave is going to retail for $299 when it becomes available for direct purchase. In the meantime, since it's still a pre-order, so there's still a few months before you receive it, I think we're offering a $40 off discount until the end of the holidays, so $259. And yeah, you go to EMBRLabs.com, and it's right there for people.
Thanks.
Hi. Are there any information that's recordable, that's collected? Was one question. And and your tests, have it been? Did you do any type of placebo effect test? And what effect would it have because you're using low voltage on pacemakers, for example?
Could you clarify the first question about data?
Is there a way it's collecting data or creating data, and is that recordable?
Cool. So it's recording usage data about how much warming or how much cooling you use, and it's saving that. And then when you connect it with your mobile app, that data goes to your mobile app. Your second question was about, remind me what the second one was? There was 3. Oh yeah, was there a placebo? Have you done a placebo-controlled test?
Yeah,
Right.
placebo-controlled testing. Was any in this involved FDA or anything?
So this is a topic that hasn't come up at all, but it's really important for us. Is we are, as making a product that is trying to make people feel better. We had this decision to make about whether we were going to be a medical device or whether we were going to be a consumer device. And if we were a medical device, we could charge a much higher premium, and we could make lots of very specific claims and say that it helps with this condition and that condition, and we could do all this stuff and try to be reimbursed by your health insurance and whatever, but it was going to take a long time, and you had to go through FDA approval and lots of stuff like that. Or you could be a consumer device, and we ultimately decided to do the latter. And what that means is we're not allowed to claim anything about specific medical conditions that this helps with at all. We're not even allowed to talk about medical conditions. But the flip side, the kind of upside of that is we also have a much lower bar for proof. If I can tell you that 70% of people who wore this said it helped them, it doesn't matter whether 70% of people with a placebo also said it helped them, because nobody cares, in a sense. And so we haven't done the placebo-controlled test. I would love to do it, honestly, because, and like not only placebo, but also double-blind and also third-party. That would be cool because there are a lot of doctors who would totally prescribe this, even as an over-the-counter, buy it on Amazon kind of recommendation, if there was a study that made them feel like this is, legit. And a lot of doctors, to their credit, will not just recommend something without more concrete data. We don't have the money to do that study, so until somebody comes and gives us that money, we probably won't have it. And the last question about low voltage and stuff like that. Fundamentally, there's nothing about the kind of electrical part of Embr Wave that's different than any other smartwatch, so we don't have any specific interactions with pacemakers or implantable devices, except I guess for the fact that there's a magnet. This is a similar band to the Apple Watch. There's a magnet, so I guess I don't know very much about magnets and pacemakers, but something to think about.
Can you speak to the design of it, just in the sense that like it is fairly bulky and larger? Did you do any research and kind of talk about if you can make it sleeker or less space on your wrist, the whole design background?
Yeah, so design is something that, industrial design and mechanical engineering is something that I was relatively new to. So I'll tell you guys the story a little bit about how this came into being. And this is actually an engineering sample, so it has gotten a little bit sleeker and rounder, but for all intents and purposes, this is similar to what the final product is like. It could be sleeker. There are two main reasons why it's the kind of form factor that it is. One of them is if the thing was too small, you wouldn't really feel it. You need a good like square inch of like temperature for your thermoreceptors to really register that something is going on. And so we wanted to we kind of wanted to err on the side of powerfulness as opposed to the minimal but not very strong side of things. And the other thing is much more related to kind of supply chain and manufacturing was we wanted to have a battery that was super, super safe. There's a lithium-ion battery in here, like a lot of other devices. We did not want to have an unsafe lithium-ion battery because it's strapped to your wrist. So we went with like a super vetted, certified, large, fancy name battery. And it turns out they've only got so many choices. And we chose the one that would give you the longer battery life and would be super safe, but that was a little bit bigger than we wanted. And so as a result, we ended up with a device that has more battery life than lasts longer than I would have designed for, which is not a bad thing. And also tends to be kind of thermally stable more than we necessarily needed. So when it's cooling, it's actually pulling heat away from your skin, and therefore the top will get hot. But it gets less hot because it's bigger, so that's nice. But the flip side of that is some people are going to say, you know what, it's too big for my taste. And as a first product, that's something I totally recognize. That's going to be a thing, and then my answer is second product will be sleeker. In the meantime, this is going to be the product for people who really benefit from it. What I hear day in and day out from people is the days when they knew they were going to be comfortable, they didn't wear it, and that's fine. And the days where they were going to benefit from it, they didn't care about the size at all.
Have you thought about adding any sort of automation into the device such that someone wouldn't have to say, oh, I'm getting hot? It would just detect that you're getting hot and then fix it for you?
That's a really interesting question. So the idea of a thing that is kind of like the equivalent of a learning thermostat, but for your body, and that can preemptively cool or warm you is a really appealing one, and one that is very high up on our list of requests from people. There's two reasons we haven't done it yet. One of them is it's really hard. How do you predict people's comfort? Like there's purely physical cues, but there's also mental stuff going on, and we don't necessarily tap into it. And you don't want to be cooling people when they don't want it, or warming people and giving them a bad surprise when they don't want it. So until we get it right, we're learning how to do it, but we haven't kind of rolled that out yet. The second thing, which to me is like, as a person interested in like behavior, is really intriguing, is people really love having control of things. And actually, as much as it does require your finger to like actually tweak the cooling or the warming, there's something super soothing about actually taking action. And I'm not convinced that if the thing were automatic, people would like it better. It could very well be that doing something about your discomfort helps you feel more comfortable. So that would be interesting to find out at some point.
So you kind of answered this with the last two, but I work in the incredibly sexy industry of insurance, and I do a lot with product liability. So I'm curious, is there any margin of error where this thing can heat up really hot and potentially burn people? So on the skiing example, if I turn it on while I'm on the ski lift, and as I'm going down the mountain, it heats up and I can't get it off my wrist and it burns my arm. Is there any margin of error there that could happen?
So we've done two things to make sure that can't happen. The first thing that we've done is they're basically temperature sensors that are on multiple places in the bracelet that are sensing the temperature of your skin and the temperature of the bracelet and stuff like that. And that any time that temperature goes above the temperature of a hot tub, the thing shuts off automatically. And the second thing that we've done is even if there's a software bug, and that wouldn't get caught, the device crashes and does some weird stuff, there's actually in hardware, there's resistors that are placed strategically so that the thing will shut off if it warms up. So that thermal fuse, which is purely hardware and doesn't depend at all on code, is also there for a second level of protection. So the thing's not going to get hotter. It may get uncomfortably hot, but it's not going to be dangerously hot.
So when you guys were just 3 material science engineers, who started doing the embedded work for you, the electronics and stuff? Or did you learn it yourself?
So many topics. This could be a long evening if we talked about everything. This is a good topic. We spent many years with pretty much our core team and contractors, like a 3-4 person team, plus lots and lots of freelancers and contractors doing stuff. And for a long time, our embedded systems work, our firmware work, our PCB design, everything was contractors, first in the US, then in Canada. People that we knew kind of through the MIT and entrepreneurship community. And they were not cheap per hour, but they had the advantage of if things slowed down. Well, first of all, they really knew their stuff, which we didn't necessarily. And second of all, when things slowed down or we didn't need them them for that part of the project, we could just, change our expenses very quickly, which we wouldn't have been able to do if we just had a bunch of people on the payroll all the time. And then about 6 months ago or so, we hired 2 electrical engineering / firmware people. One with a more control systems background and one with a more electrical engineering background, and they've both been full-time on the team since this summer, and they've been totally amazing. So, no, I would definitely not trust myself to do it myself. Yeah, for a prototype, sure, but for a thing that's gonna cost millions of dollars to develop and get on thousands of people, tens of thousands of people's wrists, I wouldn't trust myself. So yeah, knowing your weaknesses is part of it also.
Great. And on that note, thank you so much. Please, Jimmy. Please stay around, come talk to David, talk to each other, and enjoy the rest of the food. And thank you for joining us tonight.